My mother-in-law's laugh echoed off the cold courtroom walls as she snatched the property deed right out of my hands. She didn't even notice my trembling fingers or the quiet smirk hiding behind my tears. Her high-priced lawyers were already high-fiving her, celebrating the moment they legally stripped me of my home to flip it for millions. She thought she had just ruined my life. She thought she left me penniless on the street. But as I watched her tuck that signed document into her designer bag, my heart stopped pounding and a wave of absolute calm washed over me. Because greed had blinded her completely, she was so desperate to crush me that she signed her name without ever flipping to the back of the papers. She never read the mandatory legal rider attached to the deed, and she has absolutely no idea what my salvage crew is about to do to that house tonight. What did I leave her with? Tap that subscribe button right now to see the ultimate, brilliant payback unfold. My name is Rini, and at 32 years old, I have always believed that a house is not merely a structure of wood and stone. It is a living, breathing canvas of the soul. As a professional interior architect and fine art muralist, my world revolves around lines, textures, and the stories that colors can tell when they meet a blank wall. I have never been someone who shouts to make myself heard. Instead, I poured my thoughts, my patience, and my intellect into the spaces around me, observing the world with a quiet focus that many often mistook for vulnerability. For the past 3 years, my entire heart belonged to a historic two-story Victorian house nestled on the quiet outskirts of the city. When my husband, Julian, and I first bought it, the place was practically a ruin. The floors creaked like old bones. The wallpaper was peeling in damp strips, and the roof leaked whenever a heavy rain swept through the valley. Yet, where others saw a disaster, I saw a masterpiece waiting to be born. Julian, who was 34 and working tirelessly to build his own modest business, trusted my vision completely back then. Our early marriage was filled with a deep, harmonious warmth. We had very little money, but we had an abundance of shared laughter and a profound sense of partnership. Our daily routine was simple but profoundly beautiful. Every morning, the golden sunlight would stream through the tall, arched windows of the kitchen, casting a warm glow over our mismatched wooden table. Julian would brew coffee, his eyes crinkling with that genuine affection that made me feel entirely safe, while I sketched my designs for the day. Our economic situation was modest, but we managed our finances carefully. Every spare dollar we earned did not go toward luxury clothes or expensive vacations. It went directly into restoring our home. While Julian handled the household accounts, I rolled up my sleeves and went to work with my brushes and tools. I spent countless hours on scaffolding, transforming the dilapidated interior into a breathtaking sanctuary. On the living room ceiling, I painted a sweeping, celestial sky inspired by classic European fresques. In the dining hall, I hand-carved intricate floral crown moldings and created expansive, textured murals that depicted serene landscapes. Blending classical art with modern architectural design, every room became a bespoke gallery, a testament to my dedication and craft. Our neighbors often stopped by, marveling at how a young woman could single-handedly elevate a forgotten property into something worthy of an international design magazine. I felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that we were building our future on a foundation of creativity and love. Julian would wrap his arms around my waist as we stood in the center of our transformed hallway, whispering how proud he was of my talent. We were ordinary people living a peaceful life, completely fulfilled by the quiet joy of our creation. I truly believed that as long as we had this sanctuary and each other, no hardship could ever shake us. The house was our fortress, and my art was its heartbeat. Life flowed between those hand-painted walls with a gentle, comforting rhythm that made me believe our happiness would last forever. Every corner of our Victorian home was filled with life and purpose. My art studio, located in a spacious sunroom at the back of the house, was thriving. Clients from across the state began to notice my work, and I spent my days surrounded by jars of rich pigments, rolled blueprints, and the soft classical music that always accompanied my creative process. The peace I felt was absolute, a quiet sanctuary where my mind could wander and create without boundaries. During those beautiful months, Julian and I grew even closer. He would often bring his laptop into my studio, working on his tech startup while I painted on a nearby canvas. We were a team supporting each other's dreams with a fierce, quiet loyalty. On Friday evenings, we would invite our close friends over for intimate dinners in our grand dining hall. Under the warm light of the chandelier, surrounded by my textured landscape murals, we shared stories and dreams. My ultimate hope was to eventually open our home to the community as a private gallery, a place where aspiring local artists could exhibit their work for free. It was a beautiful dream, a vision of giving back to the world through the space we had built with our own two hands. Yet, even in the middle of this perfect harmony, the first subtle shift occurred, a shadow so faint that I barely registered it at the time. It happened on a brisk Sunday afternoon when Julian's mother, Diane, made an unannounced visit. Diane was a woman of immense wealth and sharp aristocratic elegance, moving through the world with an air of cold entitlement. She had never quite approved of our modest lifestyle, nor of my career as an artist, viewing my profession as nothing more than a messy, unprofitable hobby. As I welcomed her into the foyer, Diane did not look at me. Instead, her sharp, calculating eyes slowly scanned the sweeping celestial fresco I had painted across the ceiling. She walked through the living room and into the dining hall, her fingers lightly tracing the intricate, hand-carved floral crown moldings. There was no warmth in her gaze, no motherly pride. Instead, I noticed an eerie, intense gleam in her eyes, a look of sharp appraisal, the kind a wealthy collector gives a priceless asset in an auction house. "You did all of this yourself, Rainey?" Diane asked, her voice dangerously smooth as she turned to face me. "Yes, Diane. Every wall took months of work," I replied, offering her a polite smile, though an inexplicable chill brushed against my skin. She smiled back, but the expression never reached her cold, pale eyes. She murmured something about how fascinating it was that a crumbling old house could suddenly look so exceptionally valuable. Julian quickly stepped in, beaming with pride as he praised my talent to his mother, completely blind to the calculating look on her face. I dismissed the sudden knot of unease in my stomach, telling myself that she was simply trying to appreciate my work in her own distant way. I did not know then that the peace we cherished was already beginning to slip away, and that the very walls I had poured my soul into had just caught the attention of a predator. The first true fracture in our perfect world appeared only 2 months later, arriving not with a dramatic explosion, but with the quiet, devastating weight of reality. It was a Tuesday evening when Julian returned home from his office. His face entirely drained of color, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an impossible burden. His tech startup, the venture he had poured his youth and energy into, had unexpectedly collapsed overnight due to a sudden shift in the market. The financial damage was severe, leaving us with a staggering debt that our modest savings could not even begin to cover. As Julian sat at the kitchen table, burying his face in his hands, I did not panic. I immediately sat beside him, gently pulling his hands away from his face so he could look at me. Without saying a single word of reproach, I opened my laptop and began organizing our assets, pulling up my client waitlists, and calculating how many extramural commissions I could take on over the next year to help stabilize our finances. I was ready to work day and night. However, before I could even present a formal repayment plan to our bank, Diane arrived at our doorstep the very next morning, accompanied by her personal attorney. She did not knock with the warmth of a mother coming to comfort her grieving son. She walked into our living room with a chillingly smooth smile, her silk coat rustling against the furniture. She looked around the room, her eyes lingering once again on the hand-painted walls before settling on Julian's broken form. With an air of absolute benevolence, she smoothly slid a private loan agreement across the hand-carved dining table, offering to completely clear Julian's business debts to save the family honor from public embarrassment. An intense, heavy knot formed deep in my stomach as I stared at the documents. I looked up at Diane, observing how her gaze drifted repeatedly to the ceiling frescoes, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. My instincts screamed at me that something was terribly wrong. Instead of voicing an empty protest that Julian would surely reject, I calmly reached for the paperwork, turning the pages to read the terms. Before my fingers could flip to the back sections, Diane smoothly reached out, placing her manicured hand over mine, gently but firmly stopping me. She scoffed softly, whispering to Julian about how disheartening it was that his own wife would treat a mother's generosity with such cold suspicion. Julian, desperate for an escape from his financial nightmare, immediately reached for the pen. I watched his hand tremble as he signed his name, completely blind to the trap being laid before him. As soon as the ink dried, Diane did something that made my blood run cold. She pulled out her sleek smartphone and began taking meticulous, close-up photographs of my custom wall murals and the architectural molding, capturing every angle with professional precision. When I stepped into her line of sight to block the camera, she merely offered me another sharp, triumphant smile, tucked her phone into her designer purse, and left without saying goodbye. A suffocating cloud of worry settled over our home, and for the first time, I looked at the walls I loved and felt a profound, creeping dread. Over the next 6 months, that dread manifested into a harsh, unforgiving reality. The atmosphere inside our beautiful Victorian home grew cold and distant. Julian, instead of using the private loan from Diane to quietly liquidate his failed business and rebuild our life, began changing. He would avoid my gaze, staying out late, and refusing to discuss our finances. The shattering truth came to light on a rainy Thursday afternoon. While looking for a missing tax document in Julian's desk, I stumbled upon a folder containing recent bank statements and a separate agreement with Diane. My heart sank as I read the numbers. Julian had not used the loan to clear his debts. Instead, Diane had masterfully pressured him into purchasing luxury assets, a high-end vehicle and expensive country club memberships under the guise of maintaining the Vance family status in front of his peers. She had intentionally driven him deeper into a financial hole of her own making. But the true betrayal lay at the bottom of the folder. Diane had triggered a hidden, predatory acceleration clause in their private loan agreement. Because Julian had failed to meet a minor, obscure deadline, Diane was now legally demanding the immediate, full repayment of the loan. The trap was sprung. Julian had kept this a secret for weeks, entirely paralyzed by fear and completely under his mother's psychological spell. When Julian walked through the door that evening, I did not scream or throw the papers. I simply stood by the hand-painted mural in the hallway, holding the documents out for him to see. His face flushed with shame. But before he could speak, the front door opened again. Diane walked in, accompanied by her attorney, as if she owned the place. I looked at my husband, waiting for him to step forward and defend the life we had built. Instead, Julian looked down at the floor, his voice a broken whisper as he told me that his mother was right, that we had no choice but to let her handle it. He completely sided with her, abandoning our partnership to save his own skin. The house is the only asset of real value you have left. Julian, Diane said, her voice dripping with a sickening sweetness as she looked around the grand hallway. She then turned her gaze to me, her eyes filled with cold satisfaction. And since you cannot pay me back, it is time for this property to return to hands that actually understand high society. The emotional pain was a physical weight in my chest. The man who had once promised to protect our sanctuary had handed the keys to the predator. As I stood alone in the hallway, watching Julian follow his mother out the door to her waiting car, I realized with absolute certainty that my marriage was over, and our life would never be the same again. The home I had poured my soul into was no longer a fortress. It was a battleground. But if Diane thought I would simply pack my bags and slip away into the night like a defeated ghost, she had severely miscalculated my silence. I spent exactly one night, mourning the ghost of my marriage, sitting alone beneath the painted celestial sky in the living room. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through the arched windows, my tears had dried, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I was an artist, but I was also an architect. I understood structure, I understood foundations, and I knew exactly how to find the weak points in an enemy's design. My first concrete step began that very morning. I did not call Julian, nor did I waste energy pleading with Diane. Instead, I drove downtown to the offices of a prominent law firm, carrying a thick leather portfolio under my arm. I wasn't looking for a standard divorce attorney. I had specifically sought out a brilliant, sharp-witted lawyer named Marcus, who specialized in entertainment, intellectual property, and artistic copyright law. As we sat in his glass-walled office, I opened my portfolio, revealing 3 years of meticulously documented blueprints, copyright registrations for my custom wall designs, and receipts for every single jar of specialized pigment I had imported with my own earnings. They want to take the house to pay off Julian's debt, I told Marcus, my voice steady and calm. But they don't just want the bricks, Marcus. They want the art. They want the value I created. Marcus looked through the documents, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. Together, we began quietly drafting a preparing a highly specific, legally binding rider that would be quietly attached to any future property surrender forms Diane's team would inevitably send. It was a dangerous gamble, requiring absolute secrecy and flawless execution. The rintangan, however, arrived much faster than expected. Within days, Diane's corporate legal team launched a merciless offensive. They officially filed for an expedited foreclosure and property seizure in court, aiming to bypass the standard lengthy divorce proceedings. They didn't just send paperwork. Diane deliberately sent high-end international real estate appraisers to my home, accompanied by private security guards, to value the property for an upcoming luxury flip. I stood on the front porch, refusing them entry. The pressure was suffocating. Diane herself called my cell phone, her voice echoing with a cruel, mocking laugh. She told me that I was wasting my time, that a penniless artist could never afford the mounting court fees, and that Julian had already signed an affidavit granting her full access. Every word she spoke was designed to break my spirit, to make me feel small and powerless against her millions. The emotional tension inside me reached a boiling point as I stood ground against her hired men, my hands trembling with rage but my heart locked in absolute determination. The battle had officially begun. I threw myself into the legal arena with everything I had left, working alongside Marcus to build a defense that would prove my financial equity in the property. During the preliminary court hearings, I stood before the judge, presenting evidence of the sweat equity and personal funds I had injected into the house over 3 long years. I fought fiercely, speaking with quiet eloquence about how the property's current multi-million-dollar valuation was a direct result of my architectural redesign and artistic labor. However, Diane's legal machine was terrifyingly efficient and ruthless. Her high-powered lawyers smoothly produced copies of the private loan agreements, alongside a devastating affidavit signed by Julian. Because Julian had been the sole name listed on the original household financial accounts, and because he had signed away all property rights to his mother under panic. The law viewed my artistic contributions as mere cosmetic home improvements tied to the marital estate. Diane's lawyers argued with cold precision that since the debt exceeded the value of the physical structure, the property must be surrendered immediately. The judge, bound by rigid property statutes, ultimately ruled in Diane's favor. Our initial motions were completely denied, and an expedited final settlement date was set. That night, I sat alone on the cold wooden floor of my empty art studio. The scaffolding stood like a skeleton in the shadows, and the jars of pigment looked dull under the dim moonlight. For the first time in my life, I felt utterly defeated, broken, and profoundly alone. The system had failed me. Julian had abandoned me. It felt as though Diane's wealth had successfully erased my entire existence and stolen my life's work. I buried my face in my hands, wondering if I should just give up, pack a single suitcase, and walk away from the only place I had ever called home. Then, at 2 o'clock in the morning, the sharp ring of my phone broke the heavy silence. It was Marcos. His voice was breathless, crackling with a sudden, intense energy that made me sit up straight. "Rainy, don't lose heart yet," Marcus said, his words coming in a rapid rush. "I've been up all night reviewing the judge's exact wording and the state's structural property codes. There is an overlooked loophole. The court ruled that Diane owns the physical house and the land. Yes, but because you registered your mural designs and custom architectural molds under federal intellectual property and copyright laws before the foreclosure was filed, those artistic elements do not legally belong to the real estate deed. They are considered severed personal property." A tiny, brilliant spark of hope flared to life deep within my chest. Marcus explained that we could draft an airtight intellectual property and cyberability rider and attach it to the final surrender deed. If Diane's greed blinded her into signing it without reading the fine print, a final, unexpected door would open for me. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, steady breath as the darkness in the room began to lift. I wasn't finished yet. The day of the final settlement arrived like a heavy, suffocating cloud. We gathered in a sterile, wood-paneled conference room on the top floor of the county courthouse. The air was thick with tension, and the sharp hum of the fluorescent lights overhead felt like a physical weight pressing down on my temples. Diane sat across the long mahogany table, radiating an aura of absolute triumph. She wore a tailored white designer suit, looking every bit the victorious aristocrat who had successfully crushed a troublesome insect. Beside her sat Julian, his eyes glued firmly to his lap, his shoulders hunched in absolute shame. He could not even bring himself to look at me. Marcus sat to my left, his face a mask of professional calm, his hand resting firmly on a thick stack of legal documents. On the table between us lay the final property surrender deed, the instrument that would officially strip me of my home and hand the keys over to a woman who had never picked up a paintbrush in her life. "Let's bring an end to this tedious little drama, shall we?" Diane said, her voice dangerously smooth as she nodded to her lead attorney. The attorney slid the heavy papers across the table toward me, along with a sleek black pen. I looked down at the document, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every single effort I had made over the past months, the long nights of documentation, the passionate speeches in the preliminary hearings, the financial sacrifices had failed to stop this moment. The pressure was suffocating, a wave of intense heat rising in my chest as I realized that the law, in this very room, was siding with brute financial power over genuine human labor. Diane leaned forward, her lips curving into a sharp, mocking smile. She let out a soft, open chuckle that echoed cruelly against the walls of the room. "You really thought you could outsmart me, Rainey?" se murmuré. Her tone dripping with a sickening blend of pity and contempt. "You are just a penniless artist who threw some paint on a crumbling wall. You never belonged in our world, and you certainly don't belong in that house. Sign the papers, take what little dignity you have left, and accept that you have lost." Julian flinched at his mother's words, but he remained completely silent, offering no defense, no comfort, no remorse. I was entirely on my own, backed into a corner with nowhere left to run. Diane's lawyers checked their expensive watches, their expressions cold and impatient. The judge had already signed the authorization. All that was missing was my signature to finalize the eviction and hand over my life's masterpiece. I was faced with a single, brutal choice: sign the deed and surrender my sanctuary, or refuse and face immediate, forced legal removal and bankruptcy. I stared at the black ink of the pen, the absolute pinnacle of emotional tension tightening like a vice around my throat. For a single fleeting second, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. I looked at Julian, who remained frozen in his cowardice, and then I looked directly into Diane's smug, expectant eyes. In that moment, a profound transformation took place within me. The suffocating fear dissolved, replaced by an ironclad sense of my own worth. I was not losing. I was merely changing the rules of the game. With absolute grace, a perfectly steady hand, and a calm, slow smile, I reached out and picked up the black pen. I pulled the heavy stack of documents toward me. Without a single word of protest, I firmly signed my name at the bottom of the property surrender deed. Diane let out a loud, triumphant laugh that echoed sharply off the glass walls of the conference room. She clapped her hands together in sheer delight, her face lighting up with the cruel joy of an apex predator celebrating a fresh kill. "Finally!" Diane exclaimed, her voice dripping with mockery as she reached across the table to snatch the papers. "A sensible decision at last, Rainey. Thank you for saving us any more of your tiresome, artistic tears. Julian, darling, it's over. The house is officially ours." Julian let out a long, quiet sigh of relief, still refusing to look me in the eye. Diane's lawyers began packing their leather briefcases, their smiles matching their clients' arrogance. They were so consumed by their rush to celebrate a multi-million-dollar real estate victory that they did what Marcus and I had desperately hoped they would do. They completely ignored the thick, mandatory intellectual property and severability rider firmly stapled to the very back of the DITA document they had already blindly countersigned in their earlier rush to finalize the paperwork. I stood up from my chair, smoothing down my blazer, embodying an aura of absolute dignity that caught Diane completely off guard. The laughter died on her lips as she noticed the calm, unbothered expression on my face. "Yes, Diane, the physical house is yours," I said, my voice cutting through the room with a crystal clear, chilling composure. "But before you pop your champagne, I suggest you read the attached rider you just legally ratified." Diane frowned, her eyes narrowing as she slowly flipped to the back of the document. "What nonsense is this?" she muttered, her fingers trembling slightly as she began to read the fine print. "That attachment," I explained, leaning forward slightly, states that while you own the bricks, the mortar, and the dirt, I retain 100% legal ownership of the copyright, intellectual property, and physical structures of every single piece of art inside that building. By signing that deed, you have legally agreed that the custom hand-painted walls, the sculpted crown moldings, and the bespoke architectural fixtures are considered severed personal property. And, per the court-approved timeline attached, I have exactly 48 hours to reclaim what is mine. The color drained instantly from Diane's face. Her lead attorney gasped, frantically snatching the papers from her hands to inspect the devastating clause. The boardroom fell into a horrified, breathless silence as they realized the trap they had just walked into. The power had shifted completely, and there was no going back. Armed with the court-approved writer and an ironclad legal mandate, I did not waste a single second of my 48-hour window. By 6 o'clock the following morning, a massive fleet of white utility trucks pulled up to the curb of our quiet suburban street. I had hired a highly specialized, professional architectural salvage and art conservation crew. These were experts trained in removing historic frescoes and structural art without damaging the underlying integrity of the medium. Under my direct supervision, the crew went to work with mechanical precision. They carefully applied a specialized textile backing to my grand celestial ceiling fresco, safely peeling the invaluable layers of pigment and plaster completely away from the lap. Next, they brought in precision oscillating saws, neatly slicing through the drywall panels containing my massive, textured landscape murals from the dining hall, the hand-carved floral crown moldings, the custom-molded porcelain mantelpieces, and the bespoke hardwood artistic pillars were meticulously unscrewed and packed into custom wooden crates lined with foam. We worked tirelessly through the night. As the pieces of my soul were safely loaded into the transport trucks, my heart felt lighter and lighter. I wasn't destroying the house. I was simply extracting the value I had created, rescuing my art from a den of thieves. On the morning of the second day, the deadline arrived. I stood on the bare front porch just as Diane's sleek black luxury sedan pulled into the driveway. She climbed out of the back seat, accompanied by 3 high-profile international real estate buyers from New York, all of them dressed in pristine designer suits. Diane was beaming, gesturing broadly toward the exterior of the Victorian home, boasting loudly about the turnkey historical masterpiece she was about to sell them for $3 million. As they walked up the steps, I simply stepped aside, offering Diane a polite, silent nod as I handed her the bare brass key to the front door. Diane sneered at me, pushing past me with an arrogant toss of her head as she threw the front door open wide. "Come inside, gentlemen, and prepare to be amazed by the exquisite architectural artwork," she announced dramatically. The group stepped into the foyer, and a collective, horrified gasp echoed through the structure. The scene inside was an absolute catastrophe for a real estate investor, because the custom murals, artistic drywall panels, and structural crown moldings had been legally removed. The interior of the house was reduced to a hollow, structurally compromised ruin. Gaping holes revealed the raw insulation and bare wooden studs behind the walls. The ceilings were stripped down to the rotting, exposed plaster lath, and gray dust covered the floorboards where the custom fixtures once stood. What is the meaning of this?" Diane shrieked, her face turning an unglamorous shade of purple as she spun around to face the empty rooms. The wealthy buyers looked around the hollow, heavily damaged shell in absolute disgust. Without saying a word, they turned on their heels, explicitly telling Diane that the property was a worthless liability that would require hundreds of thousands of dollars in hazardous structural repairs just to make it livable, let alone profitable. They walked out, leaving Diane standing alone in the ruined hallway. Her real estate empire deal was completely destroyed, and she was left holding the deed to a worthless, heavily taxed, and structurally condemned empty shell. I smiled warmly, turned my back on her furious screams, and walked down the steps toward my new future. That walk down the gravel driveway felt like the lightest steps I had ever taken in my entire life. Within a few short months, the crates containing my salvaged artwork arrived in New York City, where Marcus helped me secure a beautiful, sun-drenched loft in Manhattan's premier arts district. The story of the severed house murals had quietly spread through the architectural and fine art communities, generating an immense wave of international curiosity. My first solo exhibition was an overwhelming success. The hand-painted celestial ceiling and the textured landscape panels were purchased by a prestigious modern art museum for millions of dollars, cementing my reputation as a visionary interior architect on a global stage. Meanwhile, back in my old hometown, justice took its natural, quiet course. Diane found herself trapped in a financial nightmare of her own making because she owned the physical structure of the Victorian house. The city council hit her with massive fines for owning a structurally compromised, hazardous building. Unable to sell the hollowed-out shell and drowning in property taxes, she was forced to sell off her luxury vehicles just to keep the property from being condemned by the state. Julian, completely cut off from his mother's dwindling fortune and consumed by regret, tried to send me letters begging for a second chance. I never opened them. I had already built a foundation that didn't include his weakness. Looking back on my journey, from the dusty scaffolding of that old Victorian house to the bright lights of my new gallery, I realize a profound truth about life. A home is never truly defined by the wood, the bricks, or the legal deeds that other people can buy and steal with money. True value, true security, and true genius lie within your own spirit, your talent, and your unwavering dignity. No matter how hard a predator tries to corner you, they can never possess the creative soul that built the masterpiece in the first place. When you know your worth, you can always build a new sanctuary, even grander than the one you left behind. Thank you so much for reading Rainie's journey of resilience and quiet triumph. What did you think of the clever legal twist she used to protect her life's work? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with dignity when someone tried to take credit for your hard labor? Let me know your thoughts, feelings, and favorite moments in the comments section below. I love reading your insights. If you loved this emotional family drama and want to see more inspiring stories of strong women overcoming the odds, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and share this story with your friends and family. Your support keeps the creativity alive, and I cannot wait to bring you another breathtaking story next week. Until then, remember to always hold your head high and protect your inner masterpiece.